Sony is expected to announce the A7V in the first part of 2025, and with it, a load of new features and tech improvements to keep Sony competitive and to entice existing Sony photographers to upgrade. Now, with any new camera launch, you can always expect manufacturers to push the boundaries of technical specs. Things like video quality and frame rate, number of images you can shoot per second, and always faster autofocus. Those upgrades are expected. But what about the unexpected? Because camera manufacturers often skip over usability and quality and life improvements for photographers. They rarely go back to the drawing board and rethink how new technology can enable new creative abilities that were previously impossible. So today I want to talk about my growing list of features that I want to see Sony introduce that are more than just some tech upgrades. Autofocus is an expected feature for all digital cameras, but since its introduction, little has changed in how you tell your camera what you want to focus on and when it focuses. Well, in 2024, Canon released a new way for photographers to tell their camera what they want it to focus on, simply by looking at it. This idea has actually been introduced on Canon cameras before, but at the time the technology to accurately track the eye wasn't mature enough to make this feature professionally used. I've yet to try this feature, but photographers who have said it makes them feel more in control of the camera and that it may be a reason to give a Canon camera a second look. And this isn't a technology upgrade, but it's something that makes your existing camera capabilities more useful because it's the type of feature that takes in today's technology but applies it in a new way to offer a much more intuitive and faster way to autofocus. I'm sure it will be a complete game changer for many photographers. On the other side of this, sometimes there are just these low-hanging fruit where a computer just does a much better job than a human would. The next feature I want to see on Sony cameras is automatic hyperfocal distance. Hyperfocal distance is a way to get the maximum amount of your scene in focus by first getting your lens to have a very wide depth of field and then placing the focus point at a very specific distance from the lens called the hyperfocal distance. If you haven't heard of the hyperfocal distance, it's probably because achieving it requires a complex and tedious set of steps which become even harder to do in the field. So I think most photographers have forgotten about it or chosen not to learn it. To use the hyperfocal distance, you need a special calculator that takes into account your sensor size, your focal length, and aperture to get a distance measurement. And then you need to use a ruler or a tape measure to find this perfect distance from your lens so your camera has something to focus on. My belief is that a camera can calculate all of this for you and set your focus distance to the hyperfocal distance, even when compensating for thermal expansion and contraction of your lens, all with a single button press. Many cameras already have a focus distance guide, albeit a little inaccurate, so why not make use of this existing capability and allow photographers to put it to use? This is a place to store photos, and this is a place to store photos. What's different about them? One is expensive, unreliable, slow, and is the standard for digital cameras. The other one? Well, let's talk about it. This is an NVMe hard drive that you are likely to find on a modern laptop, and it has some very impressive specs. NVMe hard drives outperform even the fastest SD cards, are less prone to failure over time, and are much cheaper. But they have one downside compared to SD cards, which is that they really need to stay inside the device. In 2024, Hasselblad rolled out a new camera that included internal storage. You can still add an SD card, but if you don't have one or you don't want to use one, your images will be stored internally. To transfer them to your computer, you simply plug it in with a fast USB-C cable, and there you go. I think it's time we started talking about storage on cameras, because I believe that an internal camera storage offers a wide variety of advantages over SD cards. If the file transfer speed is fast enough, plugging in your camera rather than moving a card from one place to another isn't a burden. And perhaps cameras could be smaller and lighter if they save the space of a second SD card slot because storage wasn't unreliable. And you wouldn't need to worry about running out of storage space because storage space is cheaper. Right now, a 1 terabyte NVMe drive costs about the same as a 128 gigabyte superfast SD card. So cameras could be built with a few terabytes worth of storage, and you don't need to carry around multiple expensive, prone to failure SD cards. Something with screens has to change. I own the Sony A7 IV, and I also own the original A7. And honestly, I couldn't tell you the difference between the screens. I feel like every year, screens on smartphones have gotten better, larger, brighter, and Sony hasn't really followed suit. Actually, I was out last year with a photographer friend of mine, Jeff, and I was shocked at just how good the screen on his Canon camera was compared to mine. But I'm not just speaking about resolution and brightness. I also hate these articulating screens. I think the idea is a good one. Let me move my screen around where I want so that I can have full view of the scene, but I find myself moving the screen often just so I can avoid how bad the screen looks unless I'm looking at it straight on. And actually in 2014, Sony released an APS-C camera that had no screen at all and needed a phone to operate it. This product line was a flop, and I think out of that failure, Sony took the lesson people don't want to use their phones with their cameras. I do sometimes, but I agree, two devices is a little bit of a burden in lots of cases. I think a great example of a company that's doing this the right way is DJI. I'm a big fan of the change that DJI made to put stripped down Android phones inside of their controllers, removing the need for a smartphone as well as the controller. They created a purpose-built tool that feels more professional to use, and it had the benefit of a more cohesive experience between the controller and the drone. So here is my solution. Detachable screens. I think a photographer should be able to detach the screen of their camera to bring it to where they need, use the touchscreen or some buttons to apply the settings or view their composition or whatever they need to do, and then put it back on the camera to operate normally and presumably recharge. I think in many scenarios, this is likely to make for a more thoughtful and comfortable experience while I'm taking my photos. And I think in other scenarios, say shooting video, it'll feel right at home to those people who are used to using field monitors, mounted right on top of their camera. And I don't think it takes away from the camera's experience. In professional cameras, you're still going to have a viewfinder, so having the screen off to the side in your pocket or held by somebody else probably doesn't limit your ability to use it. Okay, well, that's all for me. If you have features that you want to see in 2025, I would really love to talk about them with you down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.